Okay, so welcome to our second lecture of today. I hope you enjoyed the first lecture. Today we welcome Dikkie Scipio to the stage. She studied at the Royal Academy of the Arts in The Hague, and she studied architecture in Rotterdam. And now she's the professor at the Münster University, and she's co-founder of KAAN Architecten. So give a warm applause to Dikkie Scipio.
Does it work? Yeah, it does, right? Good. Uh-oh. There's a black. Almost done. Well, I just start to talk to you. Bridging Time. It's a title of a book that is presenting the Museum of Fine Arts in Antwerp. But it is also what we do if we have a heritage. Does it go anything wrong? It's also what we do if we work with heritage, right? We're bridging time. So what I tell my students and what we do in the office is a design doesn't fall from heaven into your lap, right? You have to acquire a lot of knowledge, do a lot of research to start working at your design. And we have one really great tool that helps us through the design process, helps us to communicate with each party in the team, and helps us communicating the projects during its execution and afterwards. And that is storytelling. Well, we call it in our profession the narrative. And I always explain it that it's a term that implies a carefully selected set, and this is important, of supposedly true events or experience or the like that support a particular viewpoint or thesis. So it is constructing a story that helps you designing during your process and helps you during the whole execution phase and afterwards. So what is with heritage? If we develop this narrative, this really strong concept, the moment that your building is executed, when it's really built, people start to adapt your story. And your story becomes larger. People remember a building by a story. And the story is not only yours anymore, it's from more people. So it's kind of stacking on top of each other layers in the storytelling. And after a while, the story fades away because nobody remembered the old story. Sometimes the building doesn't work anymore and people don't understand anymore what the original purpose or the original idea or original concept was. So we have to bridge the time between the old story and the new story. And how do you do this? We have developed 3 approaches to reconstruct a story with heritage. And I call them crafting, merging, and bonding. And I will explain those terms to you by 2 projects for each capital. So let's start with crafting. That will be a palace, a yachting palace, that's currently a museum of the royals in Apeldoorn in the Netherlands. It is the Royal Museum of Fine Arts in Antwerp. Then we go to merging. Will be B30, that is kind of a governmental or semi-governmental institute and the Erasmus Medical Center Education Center for the students. And the bonding will be a new museum in the center of Utrecht. It's a religious museum, and a faculty in Tübingen in Germany. Good, let's start. Grafting. So what's exactly grafting? So the term originally is the physical hybrid between two plants. We have a really strong core and we tack something on top of that. But if you apply it to architecture, then you can say, okay, we have two individual buildings, a new and an old, and they together form one new architectural complex. And they, depending on each other, they're equally strong, but together they form the sum. So they're more than one, and one is, let's say, it's not two, but three. And if you are not really into architecture, it's very, very hard to define where starts the one and where ends the other. Good. We go to the palace. And then we have the two royals, William of Orange, King of England. And that's strange because he is a Dutch, what we call a stadhouder, and we don't have had kings at that time. But he married Mary Stuart of England. And by that means he became King of England and the Netherlands, together with Mary. This is the location where the palace is built, and that is a bit strange because the map is rotated. You see the Middle Sea at the south of the map instead of the west, where it is actually. But this map is there because we have, let's see where the pointer works. Pointer doesn't work. So you see this orange line on top of it, and that are two rivers. And the two rivers, they are coming together, let's say in a bit of a lower part. And this is important because it works with water pressure. And why is water pressure so important? Because this palace is called the Palace de Versailles of the North. And that is the Versailles of the North because in France we had the king of the sun, the Ludwig XIV, and he was a Catholic king. And he proved with his Versailles that he was on top of the engineering art. So with his army, he could make the most wonderful engineering structures. And if you want to build a big park, a big garden with fountains and waterwork, you need to build up pressure. And building up pressure at that time in the 17th century was an incredible part of engineering. So only the army could do that. And with this garden and its fountains, he proved that he was so powerful. So in the north, they also needed to show that they could match that. In the north, they had a Protestant king. So William III was Protestant, not Catholic. So this is the balance of power in Europe. And all this is projected in this project where they also had these fountains. So what did we do? We had to make a huge extension of the museum, and we couldn't place it anywhere in front of the museum. So what we took is the floor plan of the main house, and that is the base of the whole project. So keep this in mind, and then I show you now through the history of the development of this project, where first they had only the main house divided in a left apartment and a right apartment, left for the king, right for the queen. Then extended during all, this is 1695, the new Napoleon king, they stuccoed the whole facade, so it went from brick to white. They enlarged the whole project. They completely removed the old gardens and flattened it out. They enlarged it even more. And then they stacked a whole new layer on top of it. So what they did, they took the roof off, put a new layer on, and put the roof down on top again. It's a crazy enlargement of the building. And after all these renovations, and every time there were new kings and queens in this palace, there was a huge renovation in 1972 of Baron von Asbeck, and he wanted to bring it back all to the original state. So they took off all the white stucco, they took off the last layer, and they brought it back to the more or less original state of the building. And I say more or less because it's outside, it's exactly the same. Inside, in the construction methods, it's a bit different. Okay, so I showed you the top building, the top apartment building that we call the Corps de Logis. And then we projected the whole program that we had to add to the palace. And it's rather large, and there's not much place. And how do you do this? So what we took is taking the plan of the old palace, enlarging it to the right scale, and projecting it on the Bascour, the plaza in front of it, and down under the ground. So it's actually like this. And then, after we projected this floor plan underground underneath, we connected the stair houses in the same axe as the original stair house in the Corps de Logis. Good. Then the next question is, how do you enter this underground thing? Because that is always the problem. If you want to go underneath, you have to have any building or any stair house or any structure to go down. But if you would place it in front of the old palace, it would block the view, right? So what we did, we took the two corner pavilions and we digged there down in the ground, connect them underground, and then connect them with the main body under the palace. So if we now have the -1 floor plan, then it's large. It's almost double the space as the original complex, and you see how it works. We have the big rooms, and we have a really large foyer in the center. So all the new functions are nicely organized. Good. What is really difficult if you build underground? That before you know, you are in a shopping mall or a parking garage because you have no daylight. So for that, we took back the idea of working with the waterworks. So at the plaza, at the Bascour, we have 4 segments of grass around the fountain. That is the original thing. And what we did, we replaced the grass by glass, so 1 letter only, and we put water on top of that as a new extension of the whole chain of fountains through the project. And while building this, we could get the daylight through the water into the grand foyer underneath the fountain and the whole waterworks. So here you see how this is executed on the top. And this is the result underneath. So we have absolute daylight in an underground space. And with the working of the water, it also gives the reflections on the walls. So it has a very, sometimes it's in the space. Good, I give you some other pictures because otherwise it takes too long. It's a lot of combining good materials, reflecting the materials that we also used in the palace itself, in the original palace, and bringing it back here. So the second one is the Royal Museum of Fine Arts in Antwerp. And that is a 19th century museum, one of the first, because before that they didn't build a museum as a public building. So how do you enlarge a museum in such a strong building without you want them to get kind of battle between the old and the new? So what we did in the 4 courtyards, we included the museum. So it's down in the volumes. A little bit of history now. So where are we? We are in Antwerp. And Antwerp in the 19th century, but all the centuries before that, was the battleground of Europe. And one interesting place is what you see down below is the star, the citadel that was built by the Duke of Alva, the Spanish Duke that gained governance of the Netherlands and Belgium. And this is a citadel that's built to, let's say, to rule over Antwerp. So it was not to protect Antwerp, but to rule over Antwerp. So the people of Antwerp, they hated that place. So in a lot of cities, you see that you conserve the old citadels, you keep it in your landscape. But in Antwerp, as soon as the wars were over, they tore the whole citadel down. So, and they built over the citadel a new 19th century extension of Antwerp. Well, in this map, you see the projection of the old map, and in the corner, the museum in one of the only small parts of the citadel. And this is the 19th century floor plan or city plan that was mapped over the whole plot of the citadel. In this 19th century plan, we have in the center the museum. We have at the east side the new railways. We have large exhibition centers all around it. And it was used to map the World Expo. And after that, it was taken for the whole city plan development. Good. In a black plan and in the right position, you see it like this. The museum is part of this city development. And it's exactly in the X, and it has a really star kind of Haussmann-like plan. And this is how they showed their work at that time. What was important that the very first public museums, they were based on the structure and the floor plan of a palace. Because before that, the collectors were the rich people that had palaces, and they placed their work there. So the Louvre is one of the first that opened their spaces for public after the French Revolution, and it was kind of a walk. So the first in the typology of museums is all based on wandering around. You know, you walked through the museum like you walked in the park. And the museum is very, very strong, like the keeper of the collection. So this is what we got. And when we started the the whole project in 2003, nobody liked this project. Nobody liked this kind of architecture. Actually, like you now also consider it to be too heavy, too massive, too much in power. So actually they wanted to tear it down, but they couldn't because it was too large and they didn't know where to go with all the art. And in the meantime, they started to include all kinds of functions that they didn't have in the 19th century. So a museum, cafe, depots, a shop, conference rooms. They tried to redecorate it several times. So what you do if you start such a project, you clutter first. And you get all kinds of stuff that is dangerous for the public and for the building. You try to get it out. It was also in a neighborhood that after the 19th century completely was changing to the worst possible place. And slowly new kind of cities, a city in things like a cafe, new developments of, let's say, artists came in this place. So let's try to include this in the plan. So what we do? We cut the museum in 3 parts: the field and the public area, the collection area, and the work area. And we completely hide the extension from the city. So we took a triangle, and within the triangle we built the new extension of the museum. So it's invisible. And we placed the new into the museum, into the 4 courtyards that were only there for light. And if you have 4 courtyards, it is very hard to come from one courtyard to the other without demolishing a lot. You can understand this. So we did do this by, in the main acts and the main halls, double one of the walls and make bridges in that wall so we could go from one part of the new museum space to the other. So it works like this. We have the Rubens and Van Dyck Hall in the center, and we doubled it. So we could bridge, invisible for the public in the halls, from one part of the new museum to the other. So how do we do this if we build? And this is how the halls were looking when we emptied them. And we made a big gap. And then we took everything off that they built in the years. And what you notice then, that during execution of a project, sometimes it's just appearing that you didn't notice. And here you see that original, the central door must have been the entrance, and the 2 doors next to the central door, that were replaced much later. So then you have the whole debate with your client, which one do you prefer? But we kept the latest extensions. And we go further. We had to cut a bit of the, let's say, the cove that was hanging on the ceiling. And then if you cut it, you see how it is constructed. So this is large. It's really more than man high. And you see that it's only a little iron beam that holds it, all the plasterworks with a little gypsum stripe. All this is preceded by centuries. In the right picture, you see the bridges that we did hide behind the wall. And here you see the actual scale. You see how large this is. And it is only hanged by this little stripe on the steel. Good. Then we placed a new wall, and because we had to hang gigantic heavy artworks, we had to test them by weight. and we did do this by a beam and hanging bags of sand there, just until we thought, okay, this is enough to hang the work. And you could also extend it until the wall breaks and you can start all over again. And then one of the things that is always nice to say is that we wanted to have the striping of the brushes on the wall. And because it's so large, we had 4 painters on top of each other on the scaffolding, painting the whole striping so that we could see this little projections on the wall. And there you have the end result. All the renewal of the old museum, but in the center is a new museum. And you see here the bridge, where you go from one room to the other. And the right side, you have the completely new museum included in the old museum. They're both equally strong, but they don't merge at all. And we go to merging. So merging is kind of you make 2 projects into one. So when you have old brickwork, you can repair it and it blends together. You cannot see what's the old and the new. But if you do it in a project, in architecture, then you make 2 designs that merge into one coherent new architecture. And that is really hard to distinguish what is new and what is old. And to be honest, our clients, the people that these buildings, mostly don't care. They don't care at all. They just want a new building, a nice building. So be certain. It's a governmental building. It's built on a very nice spot of sand in an otherwise kind of wet area next to the woods and the Royal Palace in The Hague. And it's the only place in The Hague that in this area that standed after all the wars. And so the Second World War, after the Second World War, after the First World War, we had to build a new department there. And it's built by one of the head architects of the Netherlands, Knuttel. And this is the governmental building for, I think, the Department of Fishing and trade and farming, such a thing. It's a very, very closed building. And it was meant to be closed, because the most important people were on the first floor in the center part. In the lower layers, there were no important people, and you could read throughout the building how important you were by the ceilings, by the height of the ceilings, by the decorations in the building. So it's kind of an H kind of building, and in the center there is a big part that lights the corridors to the rooms. In the cross section, you see that there is a main house and there is a little stair house in the open space, right? Everything is very, very close to the public, because the idea was, hey people, don't worry, we will rule over you and we will protect you. So this is the picture of the court, so in 1917. Years after that, one of our famous architects in the Netherlands, Professor Ruisenaars, he did do an extension that was really, really highly regarded for this building. And it's in the heart of this picture and in the side, and it's enormous enlargement of the building. You see it's in the side, and in the cross side you see how large the extension of the building is. And his idea was to make complete new architecture, to make the building more democratic, more open for the people, more equal for the people that use the building. And it was hyped as a very, very, let's say, fashionable new thing. And he put a whole new structure. Oh. I don't know what happens. Yeah? Okay, good that you're here. He put a whole new structure in there, and it looked a bit like this, or exactly like this. Everyone was really happy at that time with this new intervention. And they really intervened. So everywhere were arches, there were new kinds of materials, there were new kinds of materials placed in front of it, and a kind of a new color palette in gold and light blue was added. Also, let's say, in between the H part, there was new buildings added. And then we had to renew it because new ideas, the building materials were not lasting very long, the ceilings were too low, and we had to renew the whole building. Also for governmental purposes, or to be exact, it's an advisory institute. So this one is nice because you understand now that there is a whole new steel structure within the original brick building. And they made the rooms really like an infill in the old building, right? So with complete new materials. So there we were. What do we do? So we debated a long time, should we, and this is a conversation that we have in heritage. What do you keep and what do you keep not, and by what reasons? So sometimes they say you have to keep every layer in time. Sometimes they say you have to keep the original and place something that you can remove again next to the building. And sometimes you can, let's say, merge a whole kind of new architecture into that. I miss a lot of pictures. Okay, so what we did, we removed everything and built a new upper floor, a new, let's say, interior, and new side buildings. And we did this by bringing a lot of light into the building and making new, let's say, including new craftsmanship into the building. So here you see the craftsmen that make the mosaics. And I personally think that making things well and using a lot of materials and styles that improves the quality of the building. So this one is important. Here we see the 3 layers in history. First, very clear structure, inner court. Second, completely covering the inner court. Third, opening it again. So you see the results next to each other. You also see the new added materials and how it's built now. So it's completely merging the 2 styles of architecture together, hardly noticing what belongs with one and the other. Opening the facades, having a much more open building. So the second emerging, this is an education center in Rotterdam. And this is a famous building built by Prouvé. Going wrong again. I've not much luck. It takes a lot of time. I'm sorry. Okay, so this is in Rotterdam. It's an educational building and building for research. for the medical center. And it is built also by Jean Prouvé, who developed all the elements on the facade. He was a very famous engineer and architect, and he worked together with lots of other architects in a lot of projects in Europe. And they built the building really, really fast, partly building it in situ, partly prefabricating elements and combining this in one project. So it was also, this was top architecture at that time. You see this kind of 60s, 70s kind of decoration and architecture. Then Arie Hagoort, he was the one who developed the whole plan and attitude towards the building. And he was a Dutch architect, so they worked together. And he had this whole floor plan. And we were asked in this little triangle to build a new education center. So let's go first to understanding this building. We have the tower with the elements of Prouvé, and we have all these horizontal layers down below. And here there's something as an attitude to social, economic, and politics. Arie Hagoort, with a lot of people in the 60s, 70s, thought, okay, we have a democratic, very open-minded society, and all people should have access to education. So what we do, we make one big deck, and we position a lot of buildings on top of that, and everyone that wants can enter those buildings and benefit from the education. That was the idealism behind the plan. Of course, here you see how that is meant in the... Of course, what happened is that society did take this quite literally. So the whole building was opened, and after 3 months, they had to close the entrances in all the building parts because everyone was entering the building. Everyone was sleeping there, taking stuff out the building. It was a completely uncontrollable situation. So what started really nicely as a good idea of open-minded, democratic approach to the education system went off, and what they did do then, they changed the entrances to an upper deck with big stairs and rolling stairs escalated to an upper layer, and entering the head building first, and having now all kinds of separate buildings that you could not reach unless you went to the first building, then go down, and then everything was connected again. So this didn't work. So understanding the project. The other thing was the client want to have several independent institutes of education within the center. So an education place where they could teach people that are doing midwifery, that's doing the chirurgy, that all kinds of different disciplines within the medical center had to have their own department. And I thought, okay, that you can want that, but that's stupid, because students are students, and they need a place to study. They need a place where you can lecture, and it doesn't really make that much difference whether you do one education or the other. So what if we take all the students together in one building and make a back office? So I convinced the people, and basically the only idea was you only have now to roof the triangle, and then you have a big place, and around this place. There are all the colloquium rooms and the huge lecture rooms in the center. The only thing is that we have to get light in there, and the light must be in a way that it's not hindering the people, but it's just giving a vibrant environment, and you have the connection with everything around. And that was something that we now often have. We have now these places where you can study and where you can talk with your colleagues, students. But at that time, that was really, really new. We didn't have those places. So I had to explain the people, what do I build here? Because the whole term education center was non-existent. And then I said, okay, well, if we need to gain the money for that, we call it a library. And the dean said, oh yeah, library, that's good. So we made a huge bookshelf just to have the idea and to be able to build the whole project. So the second one of bounding. The first one of bounding. Bounding, yeah. That is if you have all separate parts of buildings and you have to make it one again. So kind of making a relationship in between those buildings. And I give you two projects. One is a project that's not yet executed, but that we're working at. And that is a museum for religious art in the center of the Netherlands. And what we did do there is we have a lot of building parts originated from a lot of periods of time. And we have to build one new museum there that connects everything. And the first problem of the museum is that it's in a convent, and they want to have this entrance, this gigantic welcoming entrance. But the whole thing of having a convent is it's an introvert space. In an introvert space, it's very hard to make something welcoming. Here's the museum. So what we did, we make a kind of pivoting wall in the convent hall and opening towards the public when the museum is opening and closing when it's closed. And behind this pivoting wall, we had a kind of arch-like theme, and the arch-like theme is everywhere through the whole project. So you see all these parts in the whole complex that have this same theme and connect all the buildings parts from different areas in time. And it works like this. So how can you get new and old together while making something really, let's say, added something really new, but that is connecting. It's like making a chain to all your buildings and making a kind of route through your buildings that slowly makes you understand where you are, what you're going to, and gives you routing. Then the last one, that is in Germany, in Tübingen. It's a large extension of let's say, a faculty, and we had to build the faculty of geomorphology. That's something with stones and digging into earth, and connected it with environmentalism. And it was in a place where there's a lot of brutalistic architecture. Well, a few years, this brutalistic kind of architecture was not popular at all. It now gains a lot of enthusiasm again between the young students, but not at that time. So they asked us, okay, can you do something? Can you add this whole new faculty in this configuration of concrete? using still concrete, but, you know, make it a part of the new time age. So actually the old buildings were beautiful. They were really nice, but concrete was not that popular. So what to do? How can you bound with this kind of architecture? So we had program of just the normal student facilities, but a lot of libraries, lecture halls, this kind of things, because it's very technical education. It's on a wall, on a hill, so it's overseeing the town, and you had to have kind of idea that all the students could see each other and also open it to the plaza in front of it. So this is the new configuration. At the left side in the picture you see the latest extension of one of our colleagues that wanted to build the slide thing. In the center it's what we did to connect with the old brutalistic architecture. And it is really keeping this old structure, but making it really, really light by adding a lot of glass, but also other materials that, let's say, soften it, and a lot of craftsmanship that relate to what you're actually studying there, and all the layers in the landscape that we already had there. Good. So, to round up this, and it took almost a lot of extra time. What I think that is important, that you realize that architecture is not just a program, and then you organize your program and you put a facade around it. It's much more than that. It's kind of quality that you have to place in your buildings and in your heritage with what people will embrace your concept and the storytelling. And with that, they keep the story to the next level, and you can enlarge the lifetime of a building. And I'm strongly believing in that it's the story and the quality of what you build that saves the building. That's where I want to end with.
Thank you so much, Dikkie, for sharing your work and your analysis of your projects. We still do have some time for questions. So are there any people? You can just raise your hands if you have, yeah?
Hi. Thank you for the talk. It was very good. I was wondering, with the project in The Hague, B30, what was the decision-making process like when you decided to remove all those extra floors that had been added in the 90s?
Exactly. Did you ask what was the which process?
What drove the decision to remove the stuff that had been added in the 90s rather than reuse it?
Sometimes you can keep it, but actually in this case, the quality was really, really low. So you have to realize if you do an extension or a renovation on an old building lasts because it's built well. Or it has such a strong story that people want to maintain it, and they put a lot of effort to keep it, right? It's one or the other, or a kind of mingle of the two. If you make an extension on an old heritage building and you use materials that cannot last by the quality of the material itself, it will deteriorate, right? And if that is the case, it's really, really difficult to reuse it. All the materials are, they're quite falling apart. So this was one part. The other part was that it was built by building regulations in a certain age where people said, okay, we make low ceilings because everyone is equal and you don't need that much space. So now we know that people having to work in equally large rooms, but small and with, low ceilings, not that much light, that people don't get really happy in there. So we could not go to this same structure. So removing all the materials, removing the structure, you have almost nothing left. We debated a little bit whether we should, as a souvenir, keep one of the columns, for instance. But it seems rude to the architect that built his concept, because there was only a little amendment, and also rude to the people that you give the building back to and have to use it, because it's like kind of education, huh? You have to know, you have to learn this. This column is there because we think as architects or government that you have to understand this. So that's the combination.
Thank you.
Okay?
Any more questions? Yeah?
I was wondering, how do you decide which of the design approaches to take for individual projects?
Yeah, well, after a while, of course, we didn't start with, okay, we have these 3 approaches. But after a while, you start to understand in which situations you are, because you get more experience. But what I tell to everyone, all my students, but also in the office, you have to do your research first. You have to truly understand what is the concept or original idea of the building, and what has it become, and how is it placed in its environment. And then it quite quickly reveals what kind of approach is the best. Is this the answer on your question?
Yes, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Okay.
Do I see more hands? Anyone? We do have time for some more questions, so yeah.
With the museum in Antwerp, I'm quite interested, because it's a big step to just shift a wall by a certain amount of space.
It was.
And how did you actually get this idea? Because it's not the first thought that you would have, probably. So how was this process, and how did they react to that idea?
I was really, really strong in the idea that we have to regain the quality of the 19th century, and still had to have an extension with something that was really new. Because if you have so many meters of an enfilade of hall after hall after hall, it doesn't make sense to make another hall after that, right? So you have to have a new environment with completely different dimensions, color spectrum, different way of how to exhibit. Only then the museum would benefit if you have something new to do. So I knew that the qualities of the added space must be very different. So by putting it in the 4 courts, we could do this because we could make very different heights. The floor didn't have to connect it with the others, so we had a lot of freedom there. But it was clear that in the new exhibitions, you should have the possibility to go from one place to the other. So they knew there must be kind of a bypass. So what we could do is we could bypass through the 19th century museum, and I was determined that we could not ruin that original idea. So it had to be in the configuration of the 4 courtyards. And in the center, there's 2 halls, the Rubens Hall and the Van Dyck Hall. The Rubens Hall was very clear dimensioned, the Van Dyck Hall not. We tried to apply every rule, the golden rule, everything. We measured everything. So why did it have this dimension? We couldn't find any. And that made the whole idea of, okay, if we just double the walls and place the bridges in between, nobody would notice in the new museum, but also nobody noticed in the old museum. They just go from one hall to the other, and sometimes I'm there with the group and explaining it, and then they said, wow, and then you see the other people that are visiting the museum like, huh, is here in between something? Because you don't notice it, and it's also not something that, I'm not educating the people. I'm not telling you have to look at this because here is something amazing happen. I tell it to you and other architects. So how is the routing organized, for instance? And then they say, wow, and they go back and back to every bridge to feel how this works. But actually, there's no moment that you notice it if you don't know it. And of course you think, okay, maybe the people of the heritage think, okay, you demolish a part, what are you doing? But because of the dimensions of the second hall were not really clear, and we completely renewed the cupola with all the whole pattern, you cannot see it in no way. And this is something that changes over time, because there has been...
I think if you touch...
Hello? Yeah, because there has been a period that they said, no, you should show that there is a kind of break here. So you should know that we demolished the whole, the cupola there and replaced it, and you can read it. And I don't believe in that. I can teach you, and I can tell my colleagues, but average people are going there to enjoy the Rubens, the big artworks that are there, and not to be distracted by me having make a ceiling in a different way. You know? So sometimes you use the architecture to be amazed, and it's also in the top hall. There's a lot of really bouncing the lines thing in the ceiling. I didn't have the time to explain it to you. But it's really beautiful, diffuse daylight. And you can see the ceiling everywhere. But it's not taking all the credits of the hall. The art is still there because it's built for the art. Right?
Cool, thank you.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Hello. I would like to ask one question about the first project you were showing, the Paleis. And there was this word grafting, I think. And grafting is something also visually visible. So in that sense, when you're extending this museum and you're doing this underground space, which we can somehow relate to the Louvre extension, we lose this visual connection of the old and new. And I understand that in interior design, you want to like expose this by contrast. So the inside of the museum and your extension is very different. But from the outside, this relation of two doesn't really exist. While in Louvre, visually this pyramid meant to be this connection point in between both, and materiality helped him to like blend it. Why didn't you do anything like visually connecting those two spaces?
I did, but in a different way. So there's also a book and an explanation that's called mirroring or reflection. And in the execution of the new extension, a lot is used as a mirroring or a reflection of the old palace. So, for instance, in the old palace you have the doors, and we have an upper panel or upper doors in the old palace. That exact same theme is taken and replaced in the underground doors. There's a theme, for instance, that we have kind of a leaf of the orange blossom that is kind of symbolic for our royal house. And that leaf is sometimes projected in let's say, furniture, in decorations, in panels of the doors. Sometimes it's double or triple, and then it's a flower or a butterfly, and that reflects to the gardens. So that is placed everywhere. There are the whole floors, for instance. It's in a marble, and the marble is in a kind of patterns that resembles the carpets in the old palace. So there are numerous reflections of the old and the new, without placing the new in your face on top of outside, in front of the old architecture.
Thank you.
Is this what you meant?
In a bit. So I was thinking, as this pyramid of Pei informs from the very center of that plaza, the square, of the building, the existing palace, and the building underground. Like from the dimension of the square, when we are there and we're going to see the monument, this bond we kind of lose. Because from the underneath, maybe we can see the palace through the water, through the fountain. This visual connection exists. But the other way around, it's kind of invisible.
If you are actually there on the plaza, you can look through the ponds into the underground place.
Okay.
So that's quite funny, because people don't know it when they are there. Then they go underground and they think, huh? And then they go up again, and then they look down and say, hey! And then, you get these crazy pictures of one family member is down and one up, and they're making the pictures and the relations. So it's about how visual do you want to be as an architect? Is it needed to be always built in your face? If you work with this kind of heritage projects, right?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Thanks. Okay, that's it, I guess. Can I get another applause for Dikkie Scipio? Thank you so much. Thank you.